We have a magnificent room, one that I think cannot be surpassed in terms of originality, the workshop that has been used since the house was built with a second generation around 1866. Until 1956, this room was used as a workshop, but at the same time also served as a warehouse for the shoe lasts. You cannot imagine the kind of aura and atmosphere one experiences in this room, triggering a wonderful journey into the past. At the time I entered the company, when I was 18 or 19, this room seemed like a rather spooky place to me. The story of the room and the responsibility I felt surely contributed to this feeling. I remember that when I worked long nights and had to get lasts from this room, I escaped from this room as if stung by the tarantula. I always had the feeling that someone was going to jump out of the boxes or that something was going to start talking to me. Only as I returned to this room long after my settlement, in truth I was equipped with all my masters, I started to get the feeling that it is actually a particularly nice room that cannot be surpassed in terms of aura because it contains the entirety of the long story that we have to tell as a family. This is why I've become particularly fond of the room, and now have the feeling that the lasts, in the sense of personalities, or that my ancestors are going to start speaking to me benevolently. The Scheers are, so to say, a very long-established Viennese family, and around, or even a little before 1816, this Johann, whom we call a bit of a pioneer, pulled himself out of a winemaking dynasty by deciding that it was time for him to master another craft. At that time, the craft he chose, that of a shoemaker, was almost impossible to surpass in terms of complexity, and yet he was able to acquire an incredible amount of knowledge in such a short period of time. There is a wonderful document in the form of a book detailing where he traveled in order to be inspired and in order to learn from different masters. He must have been so talented and passionate that he, being in the first generation of shoemakers, reached a level of know-how which ordinarily can only be reached in 2 or even 2.5 generations. After founding the company nearby in the 2nd district, he moved here with his son and the growing success that he had already achieved. So when the house was built here near the Hofburg in 1866, the plan had apparently already been to stalk up to the highest league. In order to achieve this highest goal, that of the Imperial and Royal title, he showed up here with his son and was already on a level that is quite unique even in world history. Ready for the next jump, the father and son brought up a former K&K Hofschuhmacher, Imperial and Royal Court shoemaker, who was stepping down from his duties in order to receive this awarded title, which you ordinarily had to pursue with great effort. Hence they were able to join the highest league at a lower level, so to say. Soon after, the heyday began with the 2nd generation, Markus Scheer and his son Rudolf, who is still displayed on our portal in a wonderful reverse glass painting. Rudolf basically experienced the heyday by being the exclusive producer of all emperors, kings, princes and other noble houses around the entire Habsburg territory. This meant that he had an exclusive title because there was only one among the many shoemakers who was allowed to call himself the K&K Imperial and Royal Court shoemaker and chamber supplier. With this exclusive contract, he was asked to represent the feet in a strict sense, but really his obligation was to represent the personalities of these nobles. With this contract and title, he was awarded a great responsibility but was also able to achieve an incredible success. As a result, we were the only people who came to the Hofburg to equip the emperors and kings, which legitimized the location of the production and the workshop in this house, a stone's throw from the Hofburg, as a strategically highly intelligent decision. Equipped with a heavy suitcase made of wood and linen which can still be seen in our museum today, we then drove up these few meters to the Hofburg with a horse-drawn carriage in order to equip the emperors and kings with our shoes. There is a wonderful anecdote that I believe is very representative of the way our family has always functioned and still functions to this day. My great-great-great-grandfather was one of the very few who was allowed to turn his back on the emperor when leaving the room. This implied that his esteem was equal to that of an intimate personality at court, because, ordinarily, only these intimate personalities were allowed to turn their back on the emperor when they left the room. The mere fact that this knowledge was passed on to me by my ancestors is tremendously representative of our family philosophy, in that it shows that we are immensely proud of how far we have come. Nevertheless, we also know exactly where our roots lie, meaning we are aware of where we come from and where we should take our place in this whole procedure. As a result, we are all the more honored that our hard work and passion, which led to the highest quality of craftsmanship and thus connected us to the highest personalities, was rewarded with the honor of citizenship in 1907, a privilege granted to only a select few in the Habsburg monarchy. From one generation to the next, it was handed down that this was our place, which was appropriate for what we'd achieved and what has made us incredibly proud without losing sight of our roots. There is also the anecdote that we were offered high-ranking nobility titles twice, but we thankfully refused to be awarded them, knowing that it simply was not in our nature to be noble. Only our customers were noble, but we ourselves did not want to appear as someone we were not. When examining the customers who frequented our workshop at that time, it becomes glaringly obvious how incredibly important the shoe was in the life of a person, whether man or woman. As a result, it seems self-evident that our customers got their shoes in this house. If you look at the customer structures, you can basically see all the real potentates, from Emperor Franz Joseph to Emperor Karl, as well as Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany, the kings of Greece, Serbia and Romania, and the relatives of the principalities of Liechtenstein and Luxembourg. However, not only the entire aristocracy was represented, but also bankers, artists, actors, architects, inventors, and composers. It was simply part of one's reputation to frequent our workshop and be equipped in this house. This aspect of our tradition has not subsided to this day. We also practice the very important rule that we publish deceased customers in the form that we say that we were the producer of their personalities, but with the living customers, we hold back and keep these names in the background. After these 3 generations, which experienced the rapid development and great success, we naturally experienced many turbulent times. However, our focus on the quality of the craft enabled us to weather these incredibly tumultuous times at the end of the monarchy, which effectively resulted in a total loss of our customer base. In addition to these problems came the death of my great-grandfather in the interwar period, when he returned from a hunting trip with the emperor with pneumonia, which at the time was equivalent to a death sentence. The attempt of my great-grandmother to somehow keep the company going and then hand it over to her son, who was only a few years old at the time, is unimaginable from today's perspective. Because of this, my great-grandmother, who was not previously involved in the company, moved to the 1st District with her son to somehow show presence in the workshop. Together with the famous Josef, the workshop manager at the time, she was able to save the company and thus survive the first turbulent years, until the next huge blow came to her in the form of the establishment of the Nazi regime. This meant the loss of the Jewish customer base and, immediately afterwards, the destruction by the war. This was followed by the post-war occupation. Our part in Vienna was in the Russian occupation zone, which we survived relatively well. It is my strong belief that our family was able to save themselves from all these incredibly turbulent times by carrying this great high-quality product, which is based on an incredibly rich and solid foundation, on the flagpole, so to speak. When we had survived these times of crisis, it was my grandfather's turn, who had joined the company directly in 1936 when he was 18. He discovered a new business model, that of orthopaedics. The idea behind it was that a shoe not only had to be a perfect fit and should represent a personality, but should also serve to improve the health of its wearer. This finding was based on the experience that many of our former customers returned from the war with injuries, deformities, or other foot problems. My grandfather not only interpreted this duty to care for and rehabilitate these customers as an immediate opportunity, but he also understood that this actually represented the birth of orthopaedics. In his opinion, orthopaedics was not to be based on medicine, but on craftsmanship, which made him one of the pioneers of the time. As a result, he completely redesigned the health benefits and function, as well as the beauty and shape of the shoe during this time, laying the foundation for what makes us so special today. His second great talent was that even though he'd been at the forefront of the company for over 70 years, he was an incredibly creative personality and was therefore able to live out his extraordinary talent for sketching and drawing. He was able to develop these skills by exploiting his artistic freedom through the creation of women's shoes. Despite my great-grandmother's open disapproval, he frequently showed up at pret-a-porter shows and won medals at both world exhibitions and shows. Half of our entry is adorned with these awards, and we still have an abundance of shoes from this time, of which people tend to say, "Oh, we know this design from a contemporary designer." The original designs from his hand are still with us in the museum and testify to his far-reaching and diverse creativity. It was his youngest daughter who took this more seriously than the others. She completed the most exams and already managed the company together with him. He then found and married his love abroad, so that the 6th generation had left the house. There is also this anecdote that I made a suitcase in my school class when I was 13 years old, which I then gave him for Christmas. That was when my talent was discovered and my grandfather realized that I was the last hope for the business. So I was cleverly integrated into the tradition by being attracted with pocket money and small sewing work, and I gratefully took the opportunity. At that time I found it not only very practical but also fascinating to explore this family tradition, and at 19 I was still so attracted to our business that I made the decision that I wanted to continue here. During this time, of course, I had a wonderful relationship with my grandfather, who also carried me on a silver tray. Nevertheless, when the time came, I had to jump into the deep end. As soon as I joined the company in the 7th generation, I realized relatively quickly that there was an incredibly long tradition behind the company, and yet I felt that something was not how it should be. Another reason why I noticed this additional weight relatively quickly was that since I had worked with my grandfather for almost 23 years, I had witnessed the generational conflict very clearly. As a result, I was confronted with many open questions when my grandfather died, around the time I was 30 years old, which I then tried to sort and resolve. So I started to examine our tradition and decided that I only wanted to continue with those aspects of the company that were truly helpful for the craft. This year-long process overshadowed all areas, and I always like to imagine it as a puzzle in which you first have to bring the individual parts to the surface and distribute them before you can definitely choose what is decisive for the craft and what has, over the past 100 or 200 years, distanced itself from the core tasks of our craftsmanship. So this sorting process became one of my most important tasks in the company. In addition, there was the consideration of how to deal with this know-how, this, so to say, treasure trove of thousands of secrets and a vast amount of knowledge, and how to carry this jewel of culture into the future and preserve it as a cultural asset. This process has brought upon many developments, such as the complete change in our corporate hierarchy, both internally and externally. Now there is a hierarchy of know-how, replacing one of people with which we aim to inspire our employees to deal with this treasure of knowledge in a manner appropriate to our goal of conserving our tradition for the future generations. This new environment also creates a feeling that conveys our desire to continue this tradition together, while making it obvious that, as a result, we are also responsible for it together. Hence, we do everything in our power to bring about a new heyday, and should we fail to achieve this goal, to prepare ourselves for the next crises so that we may weather them as we have done in the past.